What if you could see into the future? In the movie Avengers Infinity War, who's seen Avengers Infinity War? If you've seen Avengers Infinity War, there's a bit in the movie where the Avengers, they don't know what to do. And there's a character called Doctor Strange. Okay, well, Doctor Strange looks into the future at one bit in the movie, and he looks at every possible outcome, every decision they could make, and every possible outcome in the future. He looks into all the futures, and then he decides what action to take. Wouldn't hindsight be an amazing gift to have, to think about the things you would do differently if you knew what was going to come next? Who thinks they would have made some different decisions in their life if they knew what was coming next? I definitely would make many changes to my life. There's been times in my life where I've made difficult decisions, not knowing what was going to happen. If I'd have known the outcome, it would have made my decision-making ability a lot easier. But that's not how life works, is it? We make decisions all the time. You've made hundreds of decisions already today. You've picked your clothes, hopefully. We all pick our own clothes. We all get dressed. We all choose what to eat. Or maybe you get fed, maybe you don't get a choice, but you choose whether to eat it or not. We make loads of decisions throughout the day. You've all chosen to be here this afternoon. You've made decisions today. But our faith in God should be there to help us make good decisions. So even if we can't see into the future and know what is going to happen based on the decision we make now, we have faith to help us make good decisions. So today we are going to be finishing off the last in our faith series. Over the last 7 weeks, we've looked at different characters from the Bible. And we've looked at how their faith affected the way that they chose to live. In this final message, I want to talk to you about a person in the Bible whose faith and the decisions that he made led to huge victories for God. And we're going to read this passage together, and it's going to come up on the screen. And this is the same passage we've been looking at over the last 7 weeks. It's Hebrews 11. But we're just going to take one little piece of it, starting at verse 24. And it says this: "By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw that he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he grown up, he refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead at his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel." Now, there's a lot of things in there, and if you're not familiar with the story of Moses, we're going to look at a few of those things this afternoon as we go through this passage. But this verse is basically, this section of Hebrews 11 is basically the different things that Moses does. And I want to start by asking us a few questions, a few things for us to consider. The first thing is this: how did Moses' faith lead him to rescuing God's people? And how does faith affect our choices in life? You see, throughout this passage, Moses lived by faith. He chose to make decisions, to take actions based on the future that God had for him, rather than the situation he was currently living in. His faith led him to make bold decisions. So my question is this: If Moses made bold decisions, was Moses a bold, fearless leader? Well, let's see what the Bible says about Moses. In Exodus 3:11 it says he was insecure. But Moses asked God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He was nervous and he wasn't very good at speaking. Because it says, "But Moses replied to the Lord, 'Please, Lord, I've never been eloquent,'" that means good with words, "either in the past or recently, or since you've been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish. I'm not very quick thinking. I'm not really good at talking. I never know what to say. I say the wrong things. Why would you want me to go and speak to the Pharaoh?" He had low self-esteem. Moses said, "Please, Lord, send somebody else." Maybe you've had that. Maybe you've sat and thought, "Oh, why are you asking me to do this, God? Ask someone else to do it." But despite these traits, Moses made bold decisions through faith. He made good decisions. And I want to tell you today about 5 choices that Moses made that when he acted through faith. Because these 5 things not only affected Moses, but actually if we take these on board in our own personal lives, they will help us to make good decisions every day of our life. And the first one is this: association. And it starts off and it says, "By faith Moses, when he grown up, he refused to be known as the son of the Pharaoh's daughter." Moses had been born into quite a humble family. They were slaves in Egypt. And as a young boy, he stayed with his mother. His mother brought him up. I imagine his life was probably quite simple. But as he grew older, he was brought into the royal family. He was brought into the Pharaoh's household. He was adopted into that family. So he moved into the palace. So for the rest of his teenage years, he grew up in wealth. I imagine that as a teenager, he probably had everything he could want. So he's gone from not having much, growing up in a slave community, to being brought into a wealthy palace. And despite this, he made the decision to leave that life behind in favour of returning to his people, the Israelite slaves. You see, Moses chose who to associate himself with. And I want to ask the question to you today: who do you choose to associate yourself with? What defines you as a person? Is it the football team you support? The place where you grew up? Are you a Willows kid? A Wybers kid? A Grimsby person? For us, a Yorkshire person? Yes. Do you associate yourself with where you grew up and your community? Or, as we sang today, do we associate ourselves by saying, "I know I am a child of God"? You see, by faith we can choose to associate ourselves with the kingdom of God and not the kingdom of man. That means that we choose how to live our lives. We don't make our decisions based on what the other people around us are doing. We make our decisions based on the life we want to live for God. We choose to avoid the things that are going to harm us in the world and choose to live by faith. Living as Jesus demonstrates to us. And that might mean that you're in a group of friends with people who act a certain way, and yet you choose to say, "I'm not going to live like that. I'm going to live differently." Second thing is this: suffering. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. That's what it says in that verse. You see, Moses chose to return back to his people who were slaves, and the slaves were treated really badly. Moses witnessed this for himself. It says that he observed their forced labour, which means he watched people that he associated himself, the Israelites, he watched them getting whipped and beaten as they were forced to do things for the Pharaoh. He saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew. And this led to him making some decisions. He defended his people, he fled Egypt, and he chose to live somewhere else. He gave up his position. He gave up his influence, his status, and he chose to suffer with people like him. By faith, Moses chose suffering, knowing that it was right, rather than choosing the easy option. And Moses went on and he chose to help rather than ignore. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says that basically there were some priests in Midian, 7 daughters. The daughters came to get water out of a well. Some shepherds arrived and they told the women to go away, get rid of them. And Moses helps them, and he helps them fill the water up. And actually, because of his kindness, he's invited into the house of the father of these women, and ultimately he marries one of them. So actually, his decision to not associate himself with the wealth and the things that were great that he liked, things that he was brought up in, and he chose to associate himself with other people, and he made decisions to be kind, to be nice to people, that actually the favour of God was upon him because of the decisions he made. And I want to ask you, what decisions do you need to make? Are there things that you've allowed into your life that you know are wrong and you know they hurt you, but you choose to keep doing them anyway because it's easier than facing up to the fact that you need to change? Maybe it's a bad habit. Maybe it's the people you choose to hang around with. And that leads us nicely into the next one, which is number 3, disgrace. And he says this: he regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead at his reward. Moses didn't care about how he looked to the Egyptians. He was willing to sacrifice what people thought of him to make the right decision. And the reality of this is this: that if you do number 2, which is you choose to take yourself, maybe you're hanging around with people that let's pick an example, going out and getting drunk every Friday night. And you say, I know that that's wrong. I know God says I shouldn't be doing that. So I'm going to make a decision to not do that anymore. Well, the reality of that is that, having been through that myself, you may start giving you grief for it. Why didn't you come out and get drunk anymore with us? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And he lived through the disgrace of that because he knew that his decision was better than that.
Yeah, that's right.
Are you prepared to lose face for the sake of your faith? Making big changes in your life can be scary because there will be people that don't understand. But that's okay. And we're told to have confidence because we should have faith in our decision to follow Jesus and live like he's instructed us. When I grew up in school and I told my mates that I decided to be a Christian, I used to get loads of stick for it. When I told them some of the decisions I made, to the way that I chose to live my life, I used to get loads of stick for it. But actually, I didn't mind, because I knew that God had greater things than if I'd have chosen to continue to live the way that I was living. And then number 4, perseverance. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. I want to encourage every person today. We all face similar challenges. We all struggle, and there are times that we all want to give up. Be encouraged to keep going. It says in Hebrews 12, let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us. Fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of faith. Keep going. Don't quit. God will help you. Number 5, devotion. It says this: by faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. Okay, a little bit of context. We're talking about the plagues that God said he would bring on Egypt if they didn't release the slaves. And the last of the plagues was the death of the firstborn sons of the Egyptians. And the Israelites are instructed to do what might not make sense. They were instructed to kill a lamb and paint the blood of the lamb on the doorframe of their house. I want to suggest to you that if God told you today to go home and sacrifice an animal and paint the blood of that animal on your doorframe, your neighbours might think you're a bit weird. Yeah? But actually, God gave him an instruction. The Israelites, they followed this instruction. Sometimes God asks us to do things that make no sense. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Sometimes God asks us to do things that seem crazy. And actually, if we're devoted, we obey God. God's plans are bigger than our plans. He knows what's going on. He knows things that are happening that we don't know about. Choose to follow him even if it makes no sense to you. You see, Moses leaned into the supernatural. When Moses saw a burning bush and God speaks to him through the bush, do you know what it says? It says, as Moses looked, he saw that the bush was on fire but was not being consumed. So Moses thought, run away, there's a talking bush. No, it says, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't this bush burning up? And when God saw that Moses chose to go towards the burning bush, it says this. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses, and he says, here I am. The bush is on fire. And actually, God waits for Moses to go towards that and then speaks to him. So we've got up there, we've got association, suffering, disgrace, perseverance, and devotion. And they're those key things that verse talks about. You see, if Moses, through faith, can make big decisions that lead to great victories for God, those decisions that he made led to an entire nation of people being freed from slavery and taken out of Egypt, taken out of oppression, and taken ultimately into a land that was described as flowing with milk and honey, which meant it was amazing. This amazing land that God had promised them. That happened because Moses made big decisions. Faith helps us make decisions that would look crazy to anyone else. Faith helps us look beyond the ordinary into the future that God has for us. Faith helps us to make wise decisions that might not make sense now, but will make sense in the future. And you see, Moses, his faith, his decisions, his faith decisions led to change. Just for a few minutes, I want to tell you about some of the changes that this faith decisions led to. You see, he changed his association. He chose slavery over royalty. He chose slavery over royalty. In the natural, that might not make sense. But in God's kingdom, what he chose were transformed his life. Put him in the right place to be used by God for the things that God had in store for him. He chose slavery over royalty. He changed his position. He chose humility over admiration. I think that's a harder one. He chose to be humble over, being looked up to. He got rid of the status, and he chose, no, I don't need all that status, I don't need that. I'm just going to be humble. He chose humility over admiration. He changed his reward. He chose future reward over current pleasure. He was living in the palace. He had everything he wanted. I imagine that living in the palace of a pharaoh would probably meant that he could pretty much do what he wanted. I imagine that he had lots of fun. And he gave up all of that for the future reward that God had in store for him. He changed his destination. He chose promised land over promised wealth. And he changed his devotion. He chose serving God over serving himself. And for everybody here, serving God is better than serving yourself. You might not think it now. You might think, I don't know, I quite like me, I quite like doing things for me. But actually, there's no greater reward than living for God. Faith helps us make decisions that impact not only ourselves, but impact future generations. So before I bring this to a close, you had the 5 points. I've got a bonus point for you. Bonus point. And that is simply this. Number 6, sacrifice. And for a minute, we're just going to look at another person in that passage. Because I want to talk to you just for a minute about Moses' mum. Moses' mum. You see, she made a decision that not only impacted Moses, but impacted a generation of people. And that verse started off with one more, by faith. It says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw that he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. And I want to suggest to you that the whole process of Moses obeying God and freeing the nation of Israel from captivity started because his mum made a decision. His mum chose to protect him and put him on a specific path. That path led to Moses confronting the Pharaoh, following God's instructions, seeing miraculous feats occur, plagues of frogs, plagues of locusts, and helping him free an entire nation, parting the Red Sea, all sorts of stuff, freeing a nation from slavery and leading them into the land that they were promised. And all of that stemmed from the faithfulness of a mum to protect her son and put him in the right place and put him on the right path. And for those of us that are parents here, I want to suggest that actually the path we put our children on is so important. Because we don't know the future that God has in store for our kids. So as I bring this to a close, I want to end with this. If Moses, through faith, can make big decisions that lead to a great victory for God, then we too can live by that same faith. We too can make bold decisions. And we too can see great victories for the kingdom of God. Our faith will lead us to make decisions which will result in amazing things. Do you have faith for what God has in store for you and for your life? Do you have faith for what God has in store for His church? Do you have faith for what God has in store for this church? God has an amazing plan for each one of us. I truly believe that every single person here today, God has a plan for you. And the question is, are we bold enough and are we brave enough to find out what that plan is? To put ourselves in the right place where we can hear from God and He can tell us His plan and we can start living into the future that God has for us. God has an amazing future for each one of us. Let's commit to making bold decisions that lead us towards the future that God has for us. A little while ago, a guy called Meshach came to this church and he spoke to us and he talked about believing for the 1%. And what he meant by that, for anyone that wasn't in the room, he talked about the demographic of this area where this church is placed and how many people are in this area. And we calculated that if 1% of the population of this area came and found Jesus and came to our church, that will be 43 new people. Let's continue to believe for that 1%. To see this church grow with people